And hello, everyone, and welcome to Jason Gumpert. I thought if anyone knows Jason Gumpert and his role at MS Dynamics World, I thought I would kind of turn the tables. He recently interviewed me and my colleague Tanya Henderson, so I thought it'd be interesting to learn what it's like to talk to someone who kind of sees a different perspective of our Microsoft ecosystem, and I suspect he has some different interpretations of what goes on and just sees things differently. So, welcome, Jason. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
Okay, and do you want to just introduce yourself and give a quick rundown of your history?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm the editor and one of the co-founders at MS Dynamics World. We are now in our 15th year, I believe.
Wow.
So we started around 2008. And yeah, we write so we're an independent publication. Anything editorial on the site goes through me. So we cover Dynamics products, Power Platform products, Azure to an extent too. We can talk about that a bit more. And we write for kind of a broad range of the Microsoft community. So we write on news and issues that affect users, that affect partners, what's happening in the ISV angle of things. And yeah, we really just try to be, a unique and independent voice in this space that hopefully brings a sort of a business focused perspective, I think you'd say, to the coverage that we do.
Got it. And I I follow the MS Dynamics World account on Twitter, so I see the posts there and some of the headlines and articles. So I know there are news articles like, hey, this happened, or there was this merger acquisition, or Microsoft released this new feature. And then I think you have, you do some press releases. So presumably
Hmm.
companies issue press releases and you promote those or share those. And then you also do some podcasts, webinars, like you have several programs. It's not just, say, basic news articles, right?
Yeah, we try to, well, we have really two sides to what gets published. So, as I mentioned, like I'm on the editorial side. So
Okay.
what I'm focused on is sort of the non-promotional things, things that aren't promoting an ISV solution or, yeah, anything along those lines or service from a company. And then we do have a whole branded side, I guess you'd say, of the site, and it's pretty clear when it's out there. But so in terms of advertising and marketing services that we offer, yeah, ISVs, VARs that cater to our readership will do different kinds of programs with us to kind of get the word out and promote either their services, their solutions, their thought leadership in the space. So you'll see that in terms of white papers, case studies that we publish, a lot of videos. We have a growing video library, and then a pretty busy webcast calendar throughout the year with lots of on-demand recordings of all the past ones as well. And like you said, yeah, press releases, job postings,
Wow.
which is one that we added recently as sort of an extra feature. And then I'm probably missing one or two things. Oh yeah. And then I guess the one thing that sort of skirts both sides of the line, editorial and promotional, would be our podcast. Uh, that we run. So some of the episodes are promotional, and we say that, and then the other half are non-promotional and are just informational discussions. So we kind of do both kinds of things with the podcast, which has actually been a nice, and that's coming up on 5 years
Wow.
of running that too, right? I mean, time flies. I think we mentioned that when you were on. I looked back and it was like we're on
Yep.
somewhere in the 200s or 300s now, and you were on around episode 50, which at the time probably seemed like a lot for me, but yeah, we're so far past that now.
Wow.
And I was just looking with my team. I mean, we have a super busy schedule for 2023 coming up too. We've got probably more podcast episodes than ever that are going to come out.
Excellent. And so partners or ISVs can promote their product or services. They can sponsor. Is it an advertising model, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's advertising and sort of demand generation as well. So um, the vendors that promote their content with us are looking to reach our audience. They're either looking to reach users or oftentimes consultants, resellers if they're an ISV, for example, and trying to grow their sort of partner base. And so we will help them promote their either their content, their videos, their events,
Got it.
hosted on our platform, and they, through registering for an event or downloading a white paper, we can help them reach the people who are interested in their
Got
content
it.
or
Okay.
in their
Nice.
expertise. Yeah.
So you're providing a platform, and I mean, on the one hand, some people don't like advertising, but on the other hand, there is a legitimate need. I
Hmm.
attended Directions EMEA, and I met with several European ISVs that none of the US attendees had heard of. And we're like,
Oh yeah.
wow, this is a great product. How come? And it's because they have a hard time getting that connection to the US and getting the partner connections and the reseller relationships. It's a real challenge for them because they have a good base in Europe, but making some of those initial connections in the US can be a huge investment. So I personally think that partners and people in the Business Central community, at least that's where I operate, we can really benefit from learning about some of the other ISV opportunities out there.
Yeah, I mean that's been one of those challenges that's existed as long as I've been in this space, and it wasn't one that I really appreciated because I didn't come from a Microsoft channel background before this, but I learned very quickly that some of those dynamics in terms of getting your product out to market if you're an ISV selling
Yep.
through other partners is really challenging, and that Europe to North America is especially challenging and unique. I mean, I think going the other directions also has its own challenges, because they're just such different markets. The
Yep.
partners work so differently, but that's one that has been fascinating for years. And yeah, I always noticed that as an American, you go to an event in Europe and you see ISVs, with booths and things who I don't know anything about, and I'll often ask my colleague Adam, do you know this company? And he'll be like, nope, I don't think I've ever talked to anyone
Yep.
there either. But yeah, and a lot of them are thriving in Europe as very successful businesses there, but they often do. And I've had this conversation many times where a company is looking to expand into North America in particular. I mean, that tends to be more common, I would say. But it actually no, it actually happens the other. It goes in the other direction too, and they have to be very very deliberate about it, and
Yep.
a lot of building the right relationships to make it successful, and having the people with the right business skills, because it's almost never about the technology that's holding them back.
And it does take time, and it takes time to find those connections, communicate, get the word out. And I guess I'm not a sales and marketing expert, but I kind of realize that marketing is a multi-year endeavor, right? It's a long-term process to get your
Hmm.
name out and have a repeated presence at conferences on various platforms. So yeah, it's a big investment. Well, very
Yeah.
cool. So I am going to pull up, if I can hit the right button here, two of the websites. So MS Dynamics World is the one that I'm familiar with from my days in Dynamics GP, and where we first spoke and interacted in the GP world. And
Right.
I initially thought, okay, MS Dynamics World, it's Microsoft Dynamics, but it's really all the business products and services offered by Microsoft. And so, there is the Dynamics and Dynamics 365, whatever that means these days, AX, Nav, GP, CRM, Power Platform, Azure. So there's a lot of stuff under that umbrella. And while looking at the articles on Dynamics World, I saw you have a new, new for me, you'll tell me how old it is, MS Cloud News, which based on the headlines, AI and ML compute databases development integration. So kind of on the Azure product stack, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. So we started MS Cloud News really as I mean, we almost felt like we couldn't ignore what was happening in the Azure space, and I think you just mentioned it, but the idea of sort of keeping the product, tracking the various products and their names and branding a publication around that is so challenging.
Yep.
Because we started MS Dynamics World as really to be very focused and to be a niche publication. We knew we weren't going to be a ZDNet or a Tech Target or one of the bigger public and what is it, Info Week or something. Yeah, we wouldn't be a
Right.
big
Yep.
publication like that. We wouldn't be sending out a paper publication out to a subscriber list. So we went narrow, but then when we wanted to get more into Azure topics, we sort of made that choice to start. And so the MS Cloud News has been around for a couple of years now. It's been a really interesting journey with staying up to date and learning more about how the Azure channel works and the Azure ecosystem works. There's definitely some similarities to, because the way Microsoft runs, I guess, their partner program overall, and the way partners have now broadened what they offer, especially the larger partners, to offer a whole range of
right complementary services.
Yeah. But we wanted to take the same approach from a editorial perspective. There's so many sort of GAs and private previews and betas always happening in terms of all these Azure services, and so many of them. But we wanted to sort of focus more on the business of Azure because partners are so focused on it, because ISVs are bringing solutions to the various services to complement it. Microsoft's cutting deals all the time with different vendors out there to bring their services to Azure and doing so in a very heated way against AWS and Google. And yeah, that's the newest one, right? I mean, that's the huge bit of hype that's out there right now, and the very strong statements Microsoft's making about its commitment to OpenAI and how prescient it looked going back to 2019 when they put $1 billion into it, and now are able to grow that relationship in a way that seems so compelling. I mean, we'll see over time what the real outcomes are, but yeah, I mean, it's become this week a huge point, and so those kinds of relationships are I mean, something like OpenAI is such a big and broad one that it's almost tricky to report on, because everyone from the Wall Street Journal to little niche sort of Windows focused blogs pick up on it, and so where's the angle there, right, for us to really differentiate? But there are so many others. I mean, I think in that screenshot, which might has an article from, I think, a little while ago, a few days ago, is another very interesting partnership that Microsoft has, or a partner that's building on Azure for their own solutions. So, and these partnerships sort of evolve over time. So, I mean, all that stuff's super interesting to me, and I think partners who want to and IT teams who want to stay up on what's happening in Azure hopefully can get some value from us tracking those kinds of developments, as well as some expert insight. We've got some great contributors to the MS Cloud News site who write about some of the business decisions that IT professionals have to make when they're choosing where to invest their time and their effort.
Right. There's no shortage of technology, tools, solutions, services, offerings. So just looking at these kind of subsections under both of these, this is an enormous universe of technology. And so I can easily see that this could be a full-time job, tracking the news, events, and activities of all of these Microsoft products and platforms. And being formerly in the GP world, now in the Business Central world, I kind of have some inkling of some of the competition that exists, but I'm not really plugged into what's going on with Acumatica or NetSuite or Intact or anything else. So it's really hard to get a feel for how we're competing against those products. Are you aware of any other news or platforms that are oriented on other competing products similar to how you're focusing on Microsoft? Like, does NetSuite have a NetSuite news portal? I mean, it's hard to imagine, because it's like, I just think of NetSuite as this one product, or Acumatica or Intact. And so I'd say Microsoft has an interesting advantage there because of their massive stack of technology and all these integrations, and it produces news and conversations and opportunities and relationships, right? And it is, I do just kind of wonder to myself, is NetSuite, Acumatica, Intact, are those other companies going to have a difficult time long term competing against the Microsoft machine?
It's a question we've asked ourselves over the years in terms of like, should we be doing similar coverage? Should we have a NetSuite site? Should we have
Okay.
an Infor site? Acumatica focused. And I don't think I mean, there's definitely people who blog on those topics. There's partners who run very active blogs to cover news in those
Okay.
areas if they work in those channels. But I don't know offhand of any sites that are really focused on any one of those other products you mentioned. And I think it does speak to, and we've certainly looked into that ourselves, like I said, but I think when you come down to it, we were frankly quite lucky to land on Microsoft when we did. It was at a time where Dynamics was really sort of solidifying. It was a couple of years after the Great Plains and Navision acquisitions. Well, I guess maybe several years after, but they really sort of, they were already called Dynamics GP and Dynamics NAV. The products had, I guess, kind of been stabilized in that sense.
Got
And
it.
AX 4.0, I think, around the time I was. But I guess my point is, it was an ecosystem that was big enough for us to cover and has, I mean, kind of luckily, I think, for probably everyone who's invested in it, it's continued to evolve and grow and remain very successful, and be plugged in, like you said, to this much bigger and much deeper Microsoft channel. And when we've looked, and we've made some efforts in our past, not recently, but there was a time when we were running a Sage focused site, because Sage, when we were looking at it at the time, this was several years ago, and this is probably 10 years ago at this point, but they had a lot of the same characteristics that Dynamics had, in the sense of multiple, I mean, that's an understatement. They had a huge number of products, a very
Really?
active channel, a big customer base, a publicly traded software vendor based in the UK. But we actually went for it, and we started covering Sage, and it was pretty interesting. I mean, I learned a lot, but when it came down to it, the community and the interest level just wasn't there to quite the same degree as with the coverage we did about Dynamics and the audience that cares about Dynamics. I can't put my finger exactly on why that was. But after a while, we just saw that we weren't kind of getting the traction, especially compared to what we've been able to achieve, covering the Microsoft tech stack. So we left it behind eventually, but it was a really interesting experience to do that and to learn about another vendor. And I would say that, I mean, that difference between, Sage, there's tons of experts who know ERP, who know financial management, CRM even, in that space. But when you put it up against sort of what Microsoft gives the Dynamics products and broader now, not just Dynamics, like you said, it's not even, I kind of want to call it intangible. It's not really intangible, because, I mean, you can put probably a dollar sign on how much more support Microsoft can give relative to a independent software vendor. But I'd be surprised. I mean, even something like NetSuite, that's a big competitor in the SMB ERP space, right? Like I would be very interested to see a site that really focused on that and made a business out of being a publication dedicated to that space, because I think it would be harder than it would be hard for us to do, I think, and there's probably someone out there who could pull it off.
Right.
But
Interesting.
it's a really, it's an interesting question, and it's one that we certainly talk about a lot, but ultimately it's a really tough challenge.
And so there are two related topics. I don't know which direction to go, but let's start, since you mentioned you tried to look at having a news site for other products, and that didn't seem to work. One of the challenges that I think we're all facing is around the, for lack of a better term, what I will call user engagement, right? And timely, Twitter just changed whatever these icons are under each tweet. So now they are making more visible the number of views on a given tweet. And apparently people care about these things, because I was like, Really? And there was this big uproar about making it visible and whether that represents better engagement than likes or, and I'm okay. And, I understand if you're a social media influencer and you're getting paid through YouTube or Twitch or whatever, and that's your revenue stream, totally makes sense. That's literally your business. Those are your metrics. But I guess in your case, MS Dynamics World does rely upon viewership, interaction, user engagement. Are you seeing some challenges over the last 10 plus years of user engagement? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Are you fighting with other noisy social media platforms?
Well, for us, the challenge has always been not to get distracted by the wrong metrics and by certain trends or things that other I guess platforms or resources are doing well or not doing well. So it's sort of a tough question to answer, but I think it's one way I would look at it, and one thing that we were able to track pretty clearly is, the types of content that we publish. So on the editorial side, it's pretty straightforward in terms of it's articles and it's podcasts to some extent. But then, as I mentioned earlier, we have a whole range of other kinds of things that we publish on behalf of ISVs and VARs for like marketing programs they're doing and stuff. And we do see a shift, or we do see those things fluctuate, I should say, over time. I mean, webcast, like just on broad strokes, webcasts have grown in interest, and that's actually been. Yeah, we saw that, and then I recently just saw like some data from Forrester even, that just I happened to run across that seems to support that too more broadly. You can call it sort of an effect of the pandemic, perhaps, or just sort of a trend in general. But as over the last few years, people make more of their decisions about and do more of their research through online events than in-person events, for example. Not to say that obviously we both know in-person events still happen and they still have their value. But that's just like one thing that we've seen reflected in terms of the number of people that cumulatively go to our events, and the interest, sort of the organic interest that marketers now have in putting on events online as opposed to in person, that they look at it differently than they did before. They look at podcasts differently too, I would say. Articles have been really steady. It's something that kind of existed, I think, before I ever wrote anything, and will continue to. But I think there's always a place for good independent coverage that's unique and original. So that's remained really steady and topical, right? So a new article will draw just as well as it did a year ago, and but we definitely have to, you have to keep replenishing that, and people. People come and go from the space too. So someone who is reading, I mean, it's great that we've known you as long as I've known you as long as I have. And there's certainly a lot of people in the dynamic space who I can point to and say I've known them for 10 plus years now, or 15 years. But certainly people come and go. I mean, a lot of people who read our publication will then move on to another role. Maybe they're focused on whatever, SAP or Salesforce or anything else. So that's always something we have to sort of just fight against to keep people interested. But what we haven't done is chase too many of the other ways that engagement happens.
TikTok. So I'm waiting for your TikTok channel, Jason.
We don't have an Instagram or a TikTok account yet. If we do have another one, it'll probably be Mastodon, and perhaps as Twitter falters, we'll see what happens there. But that would probably be the next space. And there's even a Mastodon. There's even a Business Central focused Mastodon instance now. I don't think we would post on it directly or try to, but we'd probably set up somewhere else. But yeah, we've never really chased forums. We've never chased I don't know, other kinds of. I mean, social media has never been a key to our to our draw, I wouldn't say.
Interesting.
Yeah. Even though we do it, I mean, we certainly do LinkedIn, and we do have a decent following on Twitter too. And I know people will get our headlines there, as you mentioned before, which is great. But we've never built our business on those. But I would always be nervous to build a business on a platform like LinkedIn or Twitter.
I've seen many cases where, something happens and someone rely upon one or two of those platforms. their audience disappears, right? Whether that's an algorithm shift or an account lock or something like that. So I can totally relate. I think that is a wise strategy to own your content, own your platform, own your distribution, because that's the real value. And it's funny you mentioned podcasts. Someone, I think it was Waldo, someone asked me on Twitter, hey, Steve, can you make your live stream into a podcast so I can just listen while I'm on the train, in the car, whatever?
Yeah.
And I thought of like, well, wait, I'm doing a video live stream. Why would anyone want to listen to that as a podcast? But it turns out I'm surprised. And so I started and said, if I get 10 downloads per episode, I'll be happy. And I just take my live streams, I post them as a podcast, and I quickly surpassed 1,000 downloads according to whatever metric they're using, right?
Yeah.
I was shocked. And now it's a popular venue for people to be doing something else and to listen, just like I listen to podcasts and I listen to audiobooks while I'm, cooking, doing laundry, whatever the case is. So it was a very surprising, shift, or I guess recognition that format is still very popular.
Yeah, I kind of got dragged into doing podcasts. At first, I was probably just busy and stressed out and didn't want to get going with it, the building up the momentum. But once I did, and I started, people would say, like, I would go to an event and someone would say, I recognize your voice because I listen to your podcast while I'm driving somewhere. And just the thought of that at first blew me away. And yeah, I mean, people really value podcasts. I do too, personally, like you said too.
Yes.
It makes washing dishes less boring, or doing laundry, or working out, or whatever. So there's something very sort of direct about it that's very powerful to people. And one interesting thing is how much marketers have started to understand that, and that it, a lot like any other marketing content, it gives you a chance to not do really cookie cutter stuff. It gives you a chance to make your team human, to sort of show off that they're real, that they can be real experts, if you do it right.
And the long form, for lack of a better term, the long form format of a discussion that can occur over many minutes, kind of like this, it's really a great opportunity. And I was not so aware of him as a podcaster, but in the last year or two or whatever, Joe Rogan, I've learned, has a huge podcast following. For whatever reason, I thought it was more just the video format, but apparently it's really his podcast that was popular. It's like, wow. I'm just slowly, I listen to podcasts, but ironically, I just didn't realize that they were that popular. So
yeah, it's a whole other channel separate from, YouTube, and there's definitely overlap, but I think they exist almost independent of each other. And
I just remembered there's Dynamics Corner podcast, and there's also who just created a new podcast. Tobias Fenster has a new Business Central.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Window on Technology is his.
Oh yeah, no, I knew about. I've listened to his podcast. Yeah.
Yep, and so it is fascinating to see new podcasts sprout up, and I think I saw Tobias's podcast has done very well. So within just a few episodes, he's exceeded my total download of my podcast. So he's doing very well. So it's really interesting to see. So
yeah, there's quite a few good ones now, and it's all for the benefit. I think that the more voices that are out there, the better.
Yeah, and some people like podcasts, some people like videos, some people like blog posts. So I think at least in the BC community, we have a lot of contributors offering a lot of information in any way you want to digest it. So I think it's been very successful.
Yeah, I would just add to that, especially with the BC community. Thinking back to my start in this space, BC, at that time, Nav bloggers were an extremely helpful resource for me and for our team, both to learn about the product and get perspective, but also to sort of partner with and get support from when we entered the space that, people like Waldo and others, acknowledged who we were, that we were out there and we were doing something a little different. And when blogging, I mean, I don't know if you noticed this, but I don't know when, but at some point, blogging definitely slowed down as a medium, where experts in the space weren't blogging as much as they used to. And YouTube was starting to pick up. Podcasts were a little bit, but there seemed to be a little bit of a I don't know, gap there, or just a sort of a downturn. Podcasts have revived that a lot, I think.
Interesting.
Between that mix now. So now there's a mix where the different mediums work for different ways: podcasts, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. They all sort of serve a purpose. I think people misplace things on different. There's still a lot on different platforms where something would be better served somewhere else. But overall, I think that's really sort of revived the overall health of communication in a space like Nav and Business Central. That's my feeling anyway. Where there's certainly room for blogs, but not everything goes on blogs anymore.
Yeah, and the amount of effort, I've spoken with other people, the amount of effort to write a good, well-written, well-documented blog, particularly on a technical topic, it can be very time-consuming. And so it is often appealing to do a live stream and talk about something. It's just a little less tedious. So I have fallen to that as well, where I'm like, oh, do I really want to write a blog post on this? Because I need to be very precise and accurate and correct and get screenshots and detailed instructions. So that's a challenge. And in our discussions of how long you've been a member of the community and when we met, Ms. Belinda Allen says hello. She's waving from the stadium stands that in our audience here. And so I mean,
Belinda.
Yep. You're very much part of the Dynamics community. I've known you for many years, obviously, and Belinda as well. And so a few other thoughts. So Microsoft has this, what has often been referred to in the partner channel as the Microsoft stack. And back in the day, it was, say Dynamics GP and Microsoft Office and Windows. And now it's this enormous ecosystem where now that I'm moving to Business Central Online, it's Azure. And so all of these Azure online services, Azure Functions, Azure Active Directory, app registrations, telemetry, app insights, Power BI, like the list goes on and on and on. And it's, again, I don't know, I'm not informed about the competitors, but I just look at this and it's very common now for, say, a Business Central partner to say, oh, yeah, we're going to do an Azure function here, a SharePoint integration here, OneDrive, or Azure Active Directory for your API access. And it's an entire ecosystem now where, I mean, I have to think that Microsoft has a pretty good competitive solution relative to other offers in the ERP space. And do you have any just like high-level thoughts of what you're seeing with how Microsoft is doing, and if you think they're competitive and really innovating? Do they seem to be doing well?
Yeah, I mean, from what I've heard when it comes to Business Central, I mean, I hear it mostly through partners because Microsoft is completely opaque about how they're doing it these days with it. But other than to say they're happy with the progress, partners seem busy. Partners seem very confident in selling and winning deals with BC, and with some exceptions where there's certain industries where they'll struggle, or certain types of sales scenarios, I'm sure, where they're still a little weaker than others. But I mean, partners seem overall pretty happy with the way Business Central is selling right now. I think if anything, they want Microsoft to just add more fuel to the fire with better incentives. I referenced a poll recently where Gus Krabenborg asked sort of what do BC partners really want from Microsoft? Is it more support? Is it better learning? Or is it more margin? It was more margin. They want more margin. Margin. But I think that be that as it may, partners seem to be pretty busy and selling a ton of Business Central these days. So, I mean, health wise, I think they're in good shape. And like you said, I mean, with so many different services, so many different ways to architect an IT solution in the cloud, it creates a lot of opportunity. It also, I think, puts a lot of demand on partners to have a really good core of solution architects who can stand behind some of these more complicated scenarios and architectures, and get their clients to really buy into it. And also, I think that puts pressure on IT departments too. I mean, I don't have great insight into this, but my sense is that the IT professional of today, the rockstar IT professional, does not have the same knowledge that they had 10 years ago. It's a really different,
I can attest to
different
that.
role. Yeah.
Yep. It is a completely different set of skills, and the knowledge of things like Azure, it's an entirely different world than my on-prem background. I've had to kind of let go of all of my on-prem experience and relearn everything from scratch for Business Central Online and Azure and all the related online services that it connects with. So
I was really
would
impressed
attest to
in
that.
your when we did that podcast recently with Tanya. I mean, it sounded like you've had to dive really deep into solving some important problems for your business, whether it be license management or other things, right?
Yeah, and it's things that just didn't exist in the Dynamics GP world. It was just things were done differently. And so now we are having to just figure out, okay, how do you do license and registration or subscriptions or whatever if you want to sell a product with Business Central? Microsoft is just now starting to, I think they're testing a sales platform for licensing AppSource apps. But I mean, it's still, if you need something unique, you've got to build it yourself. And fortunately, we have some experience doing that. But the things we're trying to figure out, like how do you prompt a user to enter or register an AppSource app? And you think that would be an easy answer, but nope. Like you got to do some research. You got to design your app. You have to architect it. You have to have back-end solutions to support that. And yeah, it's a completely different universe. And I and Tanya and other colleagues from the GP world, we have quickly discovered how perishable that on-prem knowledge can be, that we are so focused on learning the new Business Central related technologies that it's like, wait, how do you do that in Dynamics GP? I'd have to go look it up. I'd literally have to pull up a window and remember how GP did something or what the solution was, because they're like two different universes.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the other one that I really am interested to see how it evolves is IP protections. I don't know if that's as big a deal for Business Central, but I think like for Power Platform based solutions, perhaps others, it's a really big deal that the vendors are sort of on their own for to be watchful of.
No, it is. Business Central has a model that is supposed to protect that intellectual property, but we are finding kind of a couple caveats to that. Is Business Central is essentially what, from the on-prem world, we consider it a rapid application development tool. So if I talk about some solution I'm working on, someone like Eric Hogard, he's so fast and efficient in Business Central, he could literally develop the solution faster than I could, most likely. And we consider that like it's an actual risk that, someone could come to market faster than you. You could have 3 competitors in the exact same space. And then what recently happened is Microsoft said, well, we're going to offer this e-commerce integration. And well, that's the Microsoft solution now. So all these third parties that develop that e-commerce integration, they're like, wait a minute. So the marketplace is really shifting quickly, and intellectual property, which once was, my code I'm going to keep secure, is more just, can I continue to compete in the marketplace with this one product or 2 products that I'm offering? So it's a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, and it also gets into the expertise, like when it comes to the subject matter expertise. The big example there that I see over and over is when it comes to like invoice automation and AP, the AP department. It's interesting because, and I've had an article brewing on this for a while, but Microsoft has all the pieces that they could do really compelling on AP automation. But my sense is, the companies that have really stood out and been successful in that space, they're successful because they have refined their offerings to be really effective. And sure, you can do OCR and you can route a workflow and get approvals and all the other accounting elements that I don't understand that well, but to really put it together in a package that's worth paying for, and that your finance department won't kill you for rolling out, it's a whole nother level.
And
So
yeah, and on the AP automation front, that's something I've been involved with for years on the GP side.
yeah,
I I see all of these AP automation vendors in various flavors, and they call themselves AP automation, but there are 10 completely different solutions that call themselves AP automation, and they operate completely differently. Some customers want to generate payments themselves and have the bank issue them. Some want to fully outsource their AP processes, and they'll just say, hey, you capture the invoice, you pay the invoice, just let us know what happened. And even though they both call themselves AP automation, customers are choosing all these different versions depending on their particular business model. And so I can understand Microsoft looking at this landscape and saying, where do we even enter this market, right? They could add one or two features, but I think that's always the angle of the ISV is they can very, very frequently offer a more comprehensive solution that meets the needs of customers and can compete against Microsoft. But
right. And as you know well, I mean, the customization versus productized IP is I mean, it's a huge difference, right? And that doesn't stop.
Yep.
Just because
so
yeah.
In addition to IP, which is something you had mentioned being interested in, do you see any other ERP or technology or other trends that you think are going to be relevant or you're going to be monitoring for MS Dynamics world?
I mean, one that kind of came back into view for me, I wrote about just a week or so ago, which is the I'm going to blank on the term, but it's like one development, one platform, I believe it's called, which is really on the F&O side of things.
Okay.
And it's this initiative essentially to stop, I'm really not well versed in it, but my understanding from what I've seen so far is, a real concerted effort from Microsoft to stop treating F&O like a platform and start treating it like an application that runs like any other Dynamics business application, where administration is less siloed off from everything else, and lifecycle management, which has been its own platform for F&O, is not siphoned off anymore, that it's managed under Power Platform Admin Center, the provisioning and all those complex things that they need in an F&O scenario, get more harmonized with the rest of the biz apps space, vis-a-vis Power Platform. And it's not to say that they're scrapping F&O's architecture or anything like that. I mean, they make that really clear, but it's this years-long effort that they're going to sort of undertake in a very deliberate way, I guess, through R&D to bring those things together where it makes sense. And I think they're trying to do it in a way that doesn't scare anybody and all that. But so it's definitely something to watch, and it's going to evolve over many release cycles, I'm sure. But to see it sort of spelled out the way it was in December, where I first sort of caught wind of the latest plans there, it was just really interesting. So, and I guess bringing it back to Business Central, the trend tends to be what happens in F&O does tend to make it in some way, shape, or form to Business Central later on. I think in not that the two products have exactly the same needs, but technology tends to get shared between the two eventually, or approaches to things like provisioning or resource management when it comes to cloud solutions. So anyway, I think it's a long-term thing to watch for both F&O and Business Central. And you're already seeing other elements that are shared, things like the push to virtual tables for Dataverse integration, or and just greater push to get all of it into to get more and more Teams touch points, or whatever. I mean, perhaps seeing more Viva-based applications. I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent on Viva, but
no, I recently, it was, yes, someone from Microsoft pointed out Viva to me, and I was like, huh. I'd heard the name, I was completely unaware of what it did. And so I had to actually look it up and try to dig through the Microsoft marketing fluff to see what exactly
I've struggled with Viva. I mean, I think Viva Sales is pretty pretty clear, and I was able to definitely appreciate what that has been, and I've written and talked about it. But like when I've looked at some of the other things that are in Viva and in Teams too, I mean, I feel like I'm actually part of it. I think is the interface, and not to go on too far of a tangent, but I just want to mention it because I was thinking about it recently. Like when I look at some of the demos or some of the short clips that Microsoft puts out about what some of the specialized Teams apps or Viva apps can do. I feel like I have like a version of face blindness. Like when I see them, I just can't tell what they're doing,
Yep.
and I feel like I'm just staring at a bunch of letters on a screen, and it's a really weird effect. I just got. I think they'll. Maybe I'm not the only person, but yeah, I feel like I'm sort of
No,
losing it when I look at some of those applications on screen.
and you get farther than I because I just look at the list. If you go to Microsoft Dynamics product page and you click on a drop down, just look at the list of what they've done with that product category. I don't know what any of that stuff is. And so it's really challenging when their marketing message is Microsoft Dynamics or Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Dynamics 365. I don't I don't know what they're talking about. And this is what I do. And so the
Hmm.
poor customer who's receiving these marketing messages, I don't think most customers understand what that any of those things mean. And so I think that's an interesting challenge that Microsoft will have is trying to have unified marketing, but Business Central and F&O couldn't be more different. I mean, they are
Right.
entirely different universes of products. I met with an F&O consultant. She described what she does. I I was listening to a story that I knew nothing about. Like she won't pick up the phone for anything short of $6 million. My jaw hit the floor. I was like, how does this work exactly? So it is completely different universes have formed, and Microsoft is trying to corral all this stuff under a cohesive brand and strategy. And I empathize with them, but yeah,
For me, that's one of the more fun parts of my job is that I get to sort of bounce between them. That I'm not at no point am
yeah,
I is anyone asking me to go and like stand up a Business Central instance for a client or
yep,
anything. So I can just sort of oh what's new over in F&O and or trying to dissect what a product that I don't understand well is really about and how much of it's real and how much of it I'm just going to perhaps dismiss, if not out loud in my head, I'll just not cover it or whatever. Um, but yeah,
I think that
that's a lot of
is
fun.
one of the advantages you have is you're able to, in theory, see across all of these products and kind of see a potentially a big picture. I'm in the weeds in Business Central because I have to
Yeah.
be, and I have no idea what's going on with F&O or even at this point Power Platform, and really know nothing about what's going on in CRM or whatever it's called now. So I do think you have a very unique vantage point if you're able to monitor all this different activity and kind of get a feel for the landscape, whereas I'm way, way deep. So
Yeah, I love that part of it of what I do, and I because I've been in the weeds on software in past jobs and stuff, and I like that too. I mean, there's a certain satisfaction you get from really getting into that, right? But I also like doing what I do now.
excellent. Well, thank you very much for chatting. It's been great to know you over the years, and
Yeah,
you're very much a participant in the community. And yeah, thank you for all the work on MS Dynamics World and keeping us up to date.
it's a pleasure. It's fun talking to you, and yeah, I mean, you're one of the people who's always made me feel really welcome in the space, even though I don't have one of the traditional roles. So I really, it's been really a pleasure, knowing you all these years, Steve.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jason, and thanks everyone for watching.
Bye.